My wife sold my car without telling me, and I'm done. I thought I was living in a happy, stable marriage. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but who doesn't, right? Then one day, I came home and found out my wife had sold my car, without asking, without even telling me. And to top it off, she thought I'd be okay with it. That's when I realized I'd had enough. Here's what happened. Before I dive into the chaos, let me tell you about my car. It wasn't just any car, it was my car. A 2005 Mustang GT, black with racing stripes, leather interior, and the kind of rumble that made your heart skip a beat every time you started it. It wasn't brand new or flashy by today's standards, but it was mine, and I loved it. I'd bought it back in college using money I'd saved from a string of summer jobs. It wasn't easy. I spent months eating ramen and skipping nights out with friends just to afford it. But when I finally drove it off the lot, it felt like all the sacrifice was worth it. Over the years, that car became a part of me. It was there for late-night drives when I needed to clear my head, road trips with friends, and even the day I proposed to my wife, Sarah. We'd driven up to the mountains, parked at a scenic overlook, and I'd asked her to marry me with the Mustang right there in the background. Sarah had always joked about how much I loved that car, sometimes teasing me that I'd probably choose it over her in a fire. It was playful at the time, or so I thought. But looking back, I wonder if she really did resent how much it meant to me. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. Life had been hectic lately. Work was stressful, money was tight, and Sarah and I had been arguing more than usual. Nothing major, just the usual stuff. Budgets, chores, how much time we were spending together. I thought we were fine, that we were just in a rough patch like any couple. But then I came home one day, and my car was gone. At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe Sarah had parked it somewhere else, or maybe it had been towed for some bizarre reason. I stood there in the driveway, staring at the empty spot where my Mustang always sat, trying to make sense of it. I walked inside, and Sarah was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Where's the Mustang?" She barely glanced up. "Oh, I sold it." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. "You what?" "I sold it," she repeated, like it was no big deal. We needed the money, and it was just sitting there most of the time anyway. Just sitting there? Was she serious? I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. "You sold my car? Without even asking me?" Sarah finally put down her phone and looked at me, annoyed. "We've talked about how tight money is right now. I figured you'd understand. Besides, you barely drive it anymore." That's when the anger started bubbling up. "You figured I'd understand? Sarah, that car means everything to me. It's not just some random vehicle. It's part of my life, my history. You had no right to sell it without talking to me first." She rolled her eyes, which only made it worse. "Oh, come on, don't be so dramatic. It's just a car. And honestly, it's better this way. We needed the money more than you needed some outdated piece of metal." Outdated piece of metal? My head was spinning. This wasn't just about the car. It was about trust, about respect. How could she make a decision like this without even consulting me? "Who did you sell it to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know," she said with a shrug. "Some guy on Facebook Marketplace. He came by this morning, paid in cash, and drove off." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My car, the car I'd worked so hard for, the car that held so many memories, was gone. Just like that. The reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. My car, the car I'd poured so much time and money into, was gone because Sarah had decided it wasn't important enough to keep. I felt my voice rising. "You sold it to some random guy on Facebook? Without even talking to me? Do you have any idea what that car means to me?" Sarah crossed her arms and sighed, like she was the one being inconvenienced. "It's not like you were driving it every day. It's been sitting in the driveway collecting dust for months. We need the money, and it was a practical decision." "Practical?" I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "What's practical about completely disregarding how I feel? This wasn't your decision to make. That car wasn't just a vehicle, it was a part of my life, my memories. You had no right to sell it without even asking me." She rolled her eyes again, which only made me angrier. "You're overreacting," she said, her tone dismissive. "It's just a car. We'll get through this rough patch, and maybe one day you can buy another one." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. She didn't get it. She didn't even try to get it. To her, it was just a car. But to me, it was so much more. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. "Sarah," I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt, "this isn't just about the car. It's about trust. It's about making decisions together. You didn't even think to talk to me before selling something that meant so much to me. How am I supposed to feel okay about that?" She stood up, clearly annoyed. "You're supposed to understand that I did this for us," she said. I'm the one who handles the bills, the groceries, everything. I'm the one trying to keep us afloat while you cling to a car like it's some kind of lifeline. I thought you'd be grateful that I'm taking care of things. Grateful? Was she serious? I stared at her, at a complete loss for words. How could she twist this around and make herself the victim? I need some air, I muttered, grabbing my jacket and heading for the door. Fine, she snapped. Go sulk about your precious car. I'll be here dealing with real-life problems. I slammed the door behind me and walked aimlessly down the street, my mind racing. This wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about our entire relationship. How had we gotten to this point? And more importantly, how could we possibly come back from it? I walked for what felt like hours, trying to cool off and make sense of everything. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. It wasn't just about the car, it was about the blatant disregard for my feelings. How could Sarah make such a huge decision without even consulting me? Eventually, I found myself sitting on a bench at the park, scrolling through my phone. I didn't even know where to start, but I had to try something. If this guy had bought my car off Facebook Marketplace, maybe there was a way to track him down. I pulled up Facebook and searched for local listings, praying I'd find something. After a few minutes of scrolling, there it was. A post with a picture of my Mustang. My heart raced as I clicked on it. The listing was marked as sold, but the seller's name and profile picture were still visible. The guy looked to be in his early 30s, wearing a baseball cap and standing next to what looked like a car restoration project. His profile was public, so I scrolled through it, hoping for some clue about where he might be. Sure enough, he'd posted a picture just a few hours earlier, my car sitting in his driveway. I didn't even think twice. I messaged him right away. Hey, I saw that you bought the Mustang from my wife. I didn't know she was selling it, and it means a lot to me. Is there any chance you'd be willing to sell it back? I stared at the screen, waiting for a response. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the little typing bubble appeared. Hey man, sorry to hear about the mix-up. I bought it fair and square, and I've already started making plans for it. I don't think I can let it go. My heart sank. I typed back, desperation creeping into my words. I understand, but that car is really special to me. I'll pay you whatever you paid for it, plus extra if you want. Please, just consider it. He didn't respond right away, and I felt my hope slipping away. After about 10 minutes, another message popped up. Look, I get it, but I've wanted a Mustang like this for years, and finding one in decent shape is hard. I'm sorry, man, but I'm not interested in selling. I wanted to throw my phone across the park. The car was gone, and there was nothing I could do about it. Defeated, I made my way back home. The walk felt even longer this time, every step heavier than the last. When I finally got to the house, Sarah was sitting on the couch, watching TV like nothing had happened. You're back, she said flatly, not even looking up. Yeah, I said, my voice cold. And I found the guy who bought the car. Her head snapped up at that. You did? Yeah, and he's not selling it back. It's gone, Sarah, for good. She didn't say anything, but the look on her face wasn't remorse. It was annoyance, like she was irritated that I'd even tried. I shook my head, feeling a new wave of anger. I don't think you understand what you've done, I said, my voice low. This wasn't just a car. It was a part of my life, and you took it from me without even asking. Do you even care how much this hurts? For a moment, she looked like she might say something, but then she just shrugged. I told you, I did it for us. You're the one making it a bigger deal than it needs to be. And that's when I realized something I'd been avoiding for years. This wasn't just about the car. It was about respect, about communication, about everything that had been wrong between us for a long time. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day over and over in my head. Sarah was next to me, already asleep, as if nothing had happened. How could she be so indifferent? I thought back to all the little red flags I'd ignored over the years, the way she always had to have the final say, even about things that mattered most to me, the way she brushed off my feelings as if they were trivial, the way every disagreement somehow ended up being my fault. The car was the tipping point, but it wasn't the whole story. It was the culmination of years of being dismissed, disregarded, and treated like my opinions didn't matter. The next morning, I woke up before Sarah and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, trying to figure out what to do next. I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't keep living like this. When Sarah finally came downstairs, she acted like nothing was wrong. Morning, she said, grabbing a mug and pouring herself some coffee. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady but firm. She sighed, already exasperated. About what? The car again? I thought we went over this. No, Sarah, I said, setting my mug down. This isn't just about the car. It's about everything. It's about how you make decisions without talking to me, how you brush off my feelings like they don't matter. I can't keep living like this. She stared at me, her face hardening. Oh, so now I'm the bad guy? Because I made a practical decision for our family? You're overreacting as usual. No, I said, standing my ground. This isn't an overreaction. This is me finally saying, I've had enough. You didn't just sell a car. You sold something that represented years of hard work, memories, and pride. And you didn't even think it was worth talking to me about it. That's not okay, Sarah. That's not how a partnership works. For a moment, she looked taken aback. Then she crossed her arms and glared at me. So, what are you saying? You're going to leave me over a car? It's not just the car, I said. It's the lack of respect, the lack of communication. The way you make me feel like I'm not even part of this marriage. The car was just the final straw. Her expression softened for a moment, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally understand. But then she shook her head. You're being ridiculous, she said, her tone dismissive again. If you want to throw everything away over this, that's on you. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm. I'm not throwing anything away, I said. I'm standing up for myself, for the first time in a long time. I walked out of the kitchen, grabbed my jacket, and left the house. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to sort through the storm of emotions swirling in my head. Eventually, I ended up at my best friend Tom's house. Tom and I had been friends since high school, and he was one of the few people I trusted enough to share everything with. When I knocked on his door, he answered with a look of concern. Hey man, you okay? You look like hell. Not really, I admitted. Can I come in? He stepped aside, and I followed him into the living room. After we sat down, I let it all spill out. The car, the fight with Sarah, the years of feeling dismissed and disrespected. By the time I was done, I felt like I'd run a marathon, emotionally drained but slightly relieved to have gotten it all off my chest. Tom listened quietly, nodding every now and then. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. Damn, man, that's rough. I mean, I knew things were a little rocky with you two, but I didn't realize it was like this. Yeah, I said, staring at the floor. I guess I didn't want to admit how bad it had gotten, but now, I don't know, I feel like this is it. I can't keep doing this. Tom nodded thoughtfully. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but it sounds like you've been putting up with a lot for a long time. Maybe it's time to think about what you really want, not just in this marriage, but in your life. I sighed, rubbing my temples. I don't even know where to start. Start by figuring out what makes you happy, Tom said. And if Sarah can't be part of that, then maybe it's time to move on. It sucks, but you deserve to be with someone who respects you and what matters to you. His words hit me hard because deep down, I knew he was right. For years, I'd been trying to keep the peace, avoiding conflict and hoping things would get better. But they hadn't. And now, I was standing at a crossroads. I stayed at Tom's for a few hours, talking things through and trying to wrap my head around the idea of what came next. When I finally left, I felt a little more clear-headed, but the weight of the decision ahead still loomed large. As I drove home, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let this slide. Whether that meant finding a way to fix things with Sarah or walking away, I wasn't going to keep sacrificing my own happiness and self-respect. When I got home, it was late, and the house was quiet. Sarah was in bed, the glow of her phone screen lighting up the room as I walked in. She didn't look up when I entered, and I didn't say anything. I just went to the couch and lay down, staring at the ceiling as the weight of everything pressed down on me. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing with memories of the good times, the times when I thought Sarah and I were on the same page. But those memories felt distant now, overshadowed by the growing realization that we'd been drifting apart for years. The next morning, I woke up stiff and groggy from sleeping on the couch. Sarah was already in the kitchen, making coffee. She didn't say anything as I walked in, just glanced at me briefly before going back to scrolling on her phone. I poured myself a cup and sat across from her. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. Sarah, we need to talk, she sighed, setting her phone down. About what now? About us, I said firmly. About what happened with the car and what it says about our relationship. Her expression hardened. We've already talked about this. I told you why I did it. I don't see why you keep bringing it up. Because it's not just about the car, I said, my voice rising slightly. It's about how you didn't respect me enough to even have a conversation before making that decision. It's about how you constantly dismiss my feelings, like they don't matter. She rolled her eyes. You're acting like I committed some huge betrayal. It was a car, for God's sake. I did what I thought was best for us. But that's the problem, I shot back. You did what you thought was best, without even considering me. That's not how a marriage is supposed to work, Sarah. We're supposed to be a team. Her face softened for a moment, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she was starting to understand. But then she shook her head. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. If this is such a deal breaker for you, then maybe we need to reevaluate things. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Reevaluate things, I repeated. Is that what you want? She shrugged, her tone cold. I don't know, but I'm tired of fighting about this. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Then I stood up, my heart pounding. Maybe you're right, I said quietly. Maybe we do need to reevaluate things. She looked up at me, surprised, but I didn't wait for her response. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, needing space to think about what that meant, and whether our marriage could even be saved. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to make sense of everything. The weight of Sarah's words sat heavy in my chest. Reevaluate things. It felt like an ultimatum, like she was daring me to make a decision I wasn't ready for. But wasn't I? Hadn't this moment been building for years? I ended up at the same park bench where I'd sat after finding out about the car. This time, I wasn't scrolling Facebook. I was scrolling through memories. Our wedding day, the way we'd laughed on our honeymoon, the nights we'd stayed up talking about our dreams. It all seemed so far away now, buried under layers of resentment and miscommunication. I called Tom again, knowing he'd give it to me straight. When he picked up, I didn't even say hello. Do you think I'm overreacting? He didn't need clarification. No, he said immediately. And you know, I wouldn't say that just to make you feel better. I sighed. It's just, how did we get here? I feel like I don't even know her anymore. Or maybe I never did. Tom was quiet for a moment before responding. Look, man, relationships change, people change, but the way she's treating you, that's not just change, that's a lack of respect, and you deserve better than that. His words hit hard, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. For years I'd been bending over backward to keep the peace, convincing myself that things would get better if I just tried harder. But nothing had changed. If anything, it had gotten worse. I sat there for a long time after we hung up, staring at the empty park and wondering what my next move should be. Deep down, I knew what I had to do, but taking that step felt impossible. Eventually, I drove home, feeling more resigned than hopeful. When I walked in, Sarah was sitting on the couch, scrolling on her phone like nothing had happened. She glanced at me briefly but didn't say a word. I stood there for a moment, staring at her and realizing that this was our dynamic now. Two people who barely even acknowledged each other, let alone communicated. And I couldn't do it anymore. That evening, I sat down at the dining table, staring at the patterns in the wood grain, trying to find the words. Sarah walked in, a bowl of popcorn in her hands, and stopped when she saw me. What's with the serious face? She asked, her tone indifferent. Sarah, we need to talk. For real this time, I said, motioning for her to sit down. She sighed, set the bowl on the counter, and took a seat across from me. Okay, fine. What now? This isn't working, I said, my voice steady but heavy with the weight of what I was about to say. Our marriage, the way we communicate, or don't communicate, it's not working. And it hasn't been for a long time. Her expression shifted, the irritation giving way to something softer, almost confused. You're seriously still mad about the car? I already told you why I did it. This isn't just about the car, Sarah, I interrupted. The car was the last straw, but it's about so much more than that. It's about the way you dismiss my feelings, the way you make decisions without me, the way I feel like I'm not even part of this relationship anymore. She blinked, clearly caught off guard by the bluntness of my words. So, what are you saying? She asked, her voice quieter now. I'm saying I need a break, I said, my heart pounding. I need time to figure out if this is something we can fix or if it's time for both of us to move on. Her face fell, and for the first time in a long time, I saw genuine emotion there. Pain, fear, maybe even regret. You're serious, she said, almost as if she couldn't believe it. I am, I said firmly. I can't keep living like this, Sarah. I've been unhappy for a long time, and I think you have too. But instead of working together to fix it, we've just been tearing each other apart. She looked down at her hands, silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. So what now? I'm going to stay with Tom for a while, I said. We both need time to think, to figure out what we want, and whether this marriage is something we're willing to fight for. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't realize it had gotten this bad, she admitted. I didn't either, I said honestly, but it has, and I can't ignore it anymore. We sat there in silence, the weight of the conversation settling over us like a heavy blanket. Finally, I stood up, grabbed a bag I'd packed earlier, and walked toward the door. Before I left, I turned back to look at her. I hope we can figure this out, I said. But if we can't, I want you to know that I don't regret the time we've spent together. I just regret how we've let it fall apart. She nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Me too. And with that, I walked out the door, unsure of what the future held, but certain that I needed to take the step for my own sanity and happiness. The first night at Tom's felt surreal. I lay awake on his couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything. Part of me felt a deep sadness, mourning the life Sarah and I had built together. But another part of me felt an overwhelming sense of relief, like I'd finally taken a step toward reclaiming my happiness. Over the next few days, I started reflecting on the past few years of my marriage. I thought about the good times, the laughter and love that had once been so easy. But I also thought about the arguments, the dismissiveness, and the way I'd slowly started to feel like a stranger in my own life. Sarah and I talked a few times during that period. Our conversations were calmer than they had been in years, but they were also heavy with the weight of everything we'd avoided saying for so long. She admitted that she'd been feeling stressed and unappreciated, which is why she'd made the decision about the car without consulting me. I told her that while I understood her feelings, it didn't excuse her actions or the lack of respect she'd shown me. In those moments, I realized something important. Love isn't enough on its own. It takes communication, respect, and a willingness to work through problems together. Without those things, even the strongest love can wither. After a lot of soul-searching, Sarah and I decided to separate permanently. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the right one. We'd both let our relationship become something toxic, and neither of us was willing or able to fix it. Walking away wasn't easy, but it taught me a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself, and for the other person, is to let go. Now, months later, I'm rebuilding my life. I've reconnected with old friends, picked up new hobbies, and even started looking for another Mustang. It won't be the same as the one I lost, but it's a step toward reclaiming a piece of myself. To anyone reading this who feels stuck in a similar situation, here's what I've learned. Don't ignore your own needs and happiness for the sake of keeping the peace. It's okay to stand up for yourself, even if it means making hard decisions. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to make a tough call to protect your own happiness? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you navigated it. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more real-life tales. Thanks for watching.